Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another BC election forecast. Now, before I begin, I'd like to once again shout out my channel members. Really appreciate the contributions you guys give to the channel. You help make all this possible, and if you guys want to support the channel, by all means, go down and link in the description below and press that join button. Otherwise, you can do that like your regular YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, and comment below. But with no further ado, let us begin. So, the BC election is getting into its final phase here. As in general terms, at time of recording, we only have 8 days before election day, really the final week here. And generally speaking, not too much exciting happens on weekends, and the final debate, at least that I'm aware of, has already occurred in this last week. So it seems very likely that there's not going to be any more significant movement in this election. That doesn't mean it's decided yet or that things aren't going to change, but it means it's getting less and less likely every day that we're going to see a very manifestly different outcome. That said, we can actually learn some interesting things about this last week. Notably, the leadership debate. Now, I'm generally speaking of the opinion that most of the time, leadership debates are inconclusive. Every now and then you can find one that was very decisive, or the opponent set up a prerequisite mood in the electorate that just did not manifest in the debate. An example of that latter one would be in 2020, Trump made a strong point arguing that Biden is just not mentally fit for office. Then come the 2020 US presidential election debates, and Joe Biden does fine. That, in turn, means that, in a sense, Biden wins those debates. Not necessarily because his points or arguments or policies were better than Trump's, but Trump set the bar so low for Biden. All Biden needed to do was show up and not have a problem, and he would win. We also see similar things in the 2023 Alberta provincial election debate, where the NDP spent most of the campaign trying to say that Smith was erratic or crazy. And then come the debate, and she's a normal, articulate, right-leaning woman. In which case, regardless of policies, regardless of arguments, regardless of attacks, Smith, in a sense, wins the debate because all she needed to do was appear to be normal, which she did. So how does that bring us to the BC election debate? Well, I'm not going to go over the whole hour and a half of the debate. If you guys want to watch the whole debate, I recommend watching it. I think it's good to watch the debates, even if, in a sense, it's inconclusive. So I'll lead specifically here. I do think this debate was inconclusive. I don't think there's very many undecided voters who are going to manifestly change their votes because of the debate. I don't think you're going to see people being, aha, EB did so good, I'm voting EB now, or Rustad did so good, I'm going to vote Rustad now. What you're going to see, and what you have been seeing in the media and politicos and journalists and stuff like that, is right-leaning guys and girls said Rustad won, the left-leaning ones said EB won, or occasionally some left-leaning ones said Furstenau won. But that's to be expected. If people are saying, oh yeah, my guy won, of course they said that. That doesn't really mean anything. The more conclusive thing, how you can show if a debate mattered or won or lost, is you look at polling, which we don't have a lot of polling since the debate, so that we can't really use that at the time of recording this. Or you can look at if the one side or the other admits that it was a bad debate. You looked at the September debate between Trump and Kamala Harris. Pretty much everyone agreed that Trump lost that debate. There's very few people on the Republican camp who are like, yeah, no, Trump won that debate. Most people are like, ooh, this was really bad. Trump should never debate again. that tells you that Kamala won the debate. If the opponent concedes the debate, that usually means they lost. Crazy, I know, crazy. But winning and losing the debate isn't actually necessarily the main purpose of a debate. And it doesn't necessarily mean it is a pointless debate. Because the goal of a debate is twofold. One, it's to try to win undecided voters. And two, it's to reassure your base. And that part is left unsaid a lot. And in that regard, I do think that this was a relatively successful debate for EB and Rustad. But an interesting thing about this debate is we can actually look at the policies and attacks and goals of the different parties in the debate, because the debate performance is the most indicative example of the issues that parties care about. And there, I'm not going to go really like item by item or line by line. I'm just going to give a very broad generalization here, because I don't want to make an hour-long video about the debate, the finer points of this BC election debate. I'm going to try to keep this one relatively short and sweet, because not too much has happened this last week. But generally speaking, Rustad kind of ignored all the attacks against him, and he really focused on just chugging on what his policies were. Cutting the carbon tax, cutting regulations, stuff like that. Bog standard, normal, milquetoast conservative stuff. But he also wasn't afraid to really defend some of his more conservative positions, like rehab, not safe supply. And that is a very useful performance in the sense of understanding what Rustad cares about. He's very much going in the line and path of what I have said many times in the past, where for a right-winger in Canada, they need to be moderately fiscal and moderately social conservative. That doesn't mean they're an arch-SOCON or an arch-FiscCon. They have to be in the middle. But they can't lean one side or the other too much, or else they alienate more voters in the game. In this regard, you look at a lot of the policies Rustad's saying, things like the carbon tax or cutting regulations, those are things that, generally speaking, the fiscally conservative types will like. Okay, reassures them. Talking about crime and the opioid crisis, that's the thing the social conservatives want to hear. That's the thing they care about. Now, some of these push and pull against each other, because rehab is going to cost a lot of money to do and set up. But it's not necessarily an anti-thing for the fiscal conservative types, because Rustad is arguing that that in the long run is going to be cheaper than the current system. So in that regard, it's a very successful distillation of his campaign. He's hit his broad handful of points, and these broad points lean strongly into what the conservatives' brand and their voters care about. The conservative brand in general terms. I don't necessarily mean the BC Conservative Party. I mean conservatism in general. The brand is the very boilerplate line is pro-economy, tough on crime. And Rustad hit that on the head. Now, it's not a remarkable debate performance. It's not going to revolutionize anything, but he really hit his core points, the core things he needed to say. And it really shows you the focus of his campaign quite clearly. If you ever have a question about what Rustad actually cares about, you can watch that debate, and it's pretty clear what he cares about. With EB, it wasn't as successful in that regard. EB spent a little too much time for my liking attacking Rustad in not very useful ways, because there are circumstances in debates where you should attack your opponent. If, for example, Rustad did something or promised, let's say Rustad, hypothetically, promised to cut down all the trees in BC. He's not doing that. But if you were to promise that, it would make sense to attack that and be like, that's a ridiculous policy. How can you say we're going to cut down all the trees in BC? That's stupid. You obviously should probably do a more articulate argument than that, but you get the picture. But a lot of the stuff EB was attacking Rustad over, and I'm not even talking about like the more character attacks that were definitely happening, but more specifically, a lot of EB's attacks were saying like, the education system when the BC Liberals were last in power was struggling to cut and some number of teachers, I don't recall the number was, or when the BC Liberals were last in power, they didn't spend enough on healthcare or something like that. I can't remember the exact line EB said. You can watch the debate if you care his exact words. But the art point here is that he was attacking Rustad for the performance of the BC Liberals 7+ years ago. And that really doesn't hit very well. It's a very weak attack. Now, in principle, if you are attacking somebody for their record, what they did in office, that is a good baseline to attack from. But you shouldn't be doing that when those portfolios are not seen as better under your government. Attacking Rustad because the BC Liberals did bad things to the healthcare system, it might be true. I don't know. I've not looked into the history of the BC healthcare system, so I can't tell you if what the BC Liberals did was good or bad. But for the sake of argument, let's say it was bad. Let's say it did hurt the healthcare system in some tangible way. Most voters presently think the healthcare system is doing pretty bad. There's not an overwhelming opinion that, BC's healthcare system in the year of our Lord 2024 is fantastic. It's the best it's ever been. That's not the mood. Most people think it's not doing so good. I don't have a doctor, or it's hard to get care. The emergency rooms are backed up. Hard to get specialist treatment, stuff like that. And yes, these aren't unique problems to BC. Every single province in the entire country is suffering from these problems. But if people are very discontent with the healthcare system, attacking your opponent because the healthcare system was bad 7 years ago is a very hollow attack. Because all it does is remind people that you've been in power for 7 years and the stuff still sucks. Is that the BC NDP's fault? Well, that's kind of up to you to decide. There's a lot of nuance and technicalities with that, and you could, I think, reasonably argue that it's probably more the Fed's fault than it is the BC NDP's fault. But you also don't see the BC NDP blaming the Feds for the problems. Even if it probably is the Fed's fault. Specifically with the healthcare system, it's probably the population growth has been too fast the last decade or so, which makes it really hard to make the healthcare system work. And the population growth is mostly too fast because of immigration. But that's a digression. So, in that regard, a lot of what EB was doing in the debate wasn't very useful. Now, this will hit very well and very true to his base. So it's not unproductive. His base will like this, and it will probably energize his base. But it is very unpersuasive to the undecided voter, because the undecided voter is going to look at this and just be like, okay, so maybe you both suck. Then you have the other wrinkle, too, of, okay, the BC Conservatives are a categorically different party. And Rustad was only a cabinet minister for 4 years, and his cabinet portfolio wasn't healthcare. So to say that the record of a party that he wasn't the healthcare minister for, that is a categorically different party, is his to bear is incongruous to a lot of people. It's not going to hit well. Okay. And then we bring up to the second point for EB's performances. He did talk a good amount about his policies. Stuff like making sure every family has a doctor and stuff like that. Now, a lot of his policies aren't groundbreaking or remarkable. They're more of a steady state promise, but that's a good thing for the NDP. They've been in government for 7 years. If you're trying to pitch a revolutionary or dramatic change in your 7th year of government, you're doomed. You're not going to win that election. You should really be running on your record and saying, okay, look, we've done this. Let's do this more. We can keep doing this. Let's keep working. But that's really kind of the problem the BC NDP has here. In a lot of senses, as I said before in previous videos, a lot of this is probably outside of their control because it's probably just the Feds screwing up, causing most of these problems. But that doesn't really matter. Because again, the NDP isn't using this opportunity to attack the Feds. I'll just digress for a second. If you look at Scott Moe or Blaine Higgs in their concurrent elections right now, which haven't gotten as much coverage because there's less polling and it's hard to do models if I don't have actual data to put in the models. But if you compare those two incumbent premiers to Eby, one of the big differences is Higgs and Moe are very content to throw all of the blame for current problems at Trudeau's feet. Now, some of that is unjust, but a lot of it is just. You look at the healthcare system. If all 10 provinces are having catastrophic struggles with their healthcare system, the Occam's razor solution is that the Feds have caused or exacerbated the problems. Because what's more likely? One government made a mistake, or 10 different governments have all made the same mistake at the same time. Including Conservative, Liberal, and NDP governments. And in the case of Quebec, CAQ governments, which are a fourth party altogether. Some people like to say the CAQ are conservatives, but a lot of Quebecers, if you talk to them, will be like, no, they're not a conservative party. They're left of center or whatever. So they're just a completely different party than the other three. You could say they're like the Bloc, maybe. So then we kind of get this molding here, where I think Eby's prep and Eby's team wasn't really certain of what they're trying to accomplish in this debate. Whereas Rustad's team really seemed to be laser focused. In a lot of ways, this is the big problem you get when you are like the NDP and a large percentage of your campaign prior to the debate has been trying to paint the BC Conservatives and Rustad himself as a radical extremist party. Because you set the expectations so low that all Rustad needs to do is be a milquetoast normal conservative on the stage, talking about normal things like we have too much regulations, or we should cut a tax, or we shouldn't let people die of drug overdoses on the street. We should get them in treatment. Like stuff like that. And that makes it very easy for him to get a good performance. Is it a winning performance? I don't think it was remarkable. Because the problem with being a milquetoast, boring performance is you can't really say you won. It's not a decisive performance. You can maybe say it's an edge, but it's nothing decisive. And then just finally to tap out and close off with Furstenau. Now, Furstenau, her big thing, she's quite articulate and she has good public speaking skills. She's very good at being calm, clear, and concise with her answers. The problem with Furstenau is her answers are too radical for the average person. It seems to me, you see this a lot with third parties, fourth parties, fifth parties. A lot of them let themselves steep too much into radicalism. And then it just never works. It's not a persuasive or compelling pitch to people to say we need to change every part of the system at the same time. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to see that. They don't want that. And Furstenau, for all of her conciseness and clarity and well-articulated arguments, is really pitching a very radical change, moving away from resource development, moving away from completely changing how we're taxing the tax system works, making more taxed on like wealth and property and such like that. Now, land value taxes are slightly different than property taxes, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other time. Etc. Etc. There's a whole hyper focus on changing how the electrical grid works or how the province works regarding climate change. And yes, maybe you like some of these policies. But if you're pitching, we need to completely change how the economy works, we need to completely change how the taxes work, we need to completely change how our society works, that's a very hard pitch. It doesn't matter what ideas you're saying. You could be the vaguely progressive green sort of socialist types like the BC Greens. You could be the arch national conservative. You could be the radical centrist. Whatever you want to call yourself. But if you're saying that we need to dramatically and radically change pretty much every part of our entire system, it's not going to persuade voters. Me and Wyatt Claypool have discussed this before when we're talking about specifically the PPC. And the PPC, because it wants to change so much at once in dramatic ways, needs voters to be at an extremely high anxiety level about the current system to vote for that. We look at Argentina in their last presidential election. Milei won largely because that anxiety level in Argentina is very high. So his campaign pitch of let's just change everything about Argentina society or government. Well, that works because people are so anxious and concerned, they're willing to try anything. But no matter how, or despite the declining quality of living and standard of living in Canada that we've seen over the last 60 months, give or take, because it really started getting bad in 2019. Now, it wasn't great before 2019, but 2019 is a big inflection point and where things start going down. If you look at like per capita wages, for example. And yes, the COVID pandemic happened after we started going downwards. It wasn't like, COVID, and then it's getting worse. That was just happened to be after we've started declining. But anyways, no matter how bad a lot of things seem, people aren't that anxious about things. People aren't willing to just completely change everything about society. That's why, for example, you'll see Rustad or any other conservative in the country run away entirely from any arguments or suggestions that they should change meaningfully the public healthcare system. People are unhappy with the public healthcare system, but they're not unhappy with the concept of the public healthcare system. They're unhappy with the results. And those are very different things. Being unhappy with the results means you want to clean it up, fix it up, polish it up. Being unhappy with the system means you want to change the system. And those two feelings are not the same and are not equivalent and might never convert into the one to the other. So, that is to say, this debate was pretty inconclusive. I would say maybe, if I want to be really generous, Rustad won, but only because EB and the NDP set up very low expectations for Rustad, and he beat those low expectations, but that's not really saying much. I think Furstenau lost because I think she came off across too radical for the average BCer, but at the same token, it doesn't matter because the Greens were never at a point where they're looking at winning seats. They might hold one. If they're lucky, they might pick up one. The other one they currently have is very unlikely to stay with them because their incumbents are retiring. So it's kind of a wash. And that's not a good thing if you are the NDP and you're trailing. It's not a good thing if you're the Greens and you're hoping to pick up seats. It's fine if you're the BC Conservatives. Though it's not a comfortable position to be in for the BC Conservatives, only at a 2-seat lead, literally 1 seat away from losing the election. Because in all likelihood, in a 46-46 tie, the Greens will back the NDP again, just like they did in 2017. But with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will see you next time with something different.